carbon tax is making news headlines again. What we hear and read from government and news media is often too simple and partisan, treating issues as points in a sporting match instead of informing. It can be difficult to understand Canada's carbon tax. Most of the country is under one set of rules, with several provinces under their own set of rules but still meeting federal carbon tax guidelines.
We know there's an issue with climate change. I just wish every party realized there was an issue with climate change. Look, since day one, our focus has been solid. We want to protect the environment, we're going to combat climate change, and we're going to be there for people, and that's what we are now by doubling the rural rebate in all rural areas of our country.
Okay, and certainly I'm not trying to negate from the impacts of climate change, nor the fact that Canadians want our government to help in fighting those effects. But I am asking you about why, when you talk about the constituency that you've represented, you now decide that it's okay to double the rebate for rural Canadians, but it was not okay to do that previously. Why did you not respond then and only now? Is it just because Atlantic Canadian seats were in jeopardy, and you don't have that many seats to be in jeopardy in Western Canada?
From the overly simplified government messages and news articles, the carbon tax can look like this. Companies pay a carbon tax as a penalty for pollution. The government pays a carbon tax rebate to Canadian citizens. Everyone pays an increased price to companies who add the carbon tax to the cost of goods and services. Circle of cash flow where the government takes a cut and the environment is no better for it. I had to find out if that idea of carbon tax was true. To find better information, I emailed ministers of the environment and members of my riding, provincially and federally. Good morning. My name is Russell. What impact has the carbon tax had on the environment climate? I understand the carbon tax is mostly a federal program, with a few provinces, such as Saskatchewan, having a provincial program instead. My understanding is that companies are taxed, pass that cost on to customers, Canadian citizens. Canadians receive checks from the government tax, and the cycle repeats, but does not appear to include any improvements for the environment. Specifically, what impact has the carbon tax had on the environment climate? And I cite my reading sources. When contacting Canadian politicians, it's typical to receive no response at all, to receive a response after several months, or to receive a letter passing the responsibility onto a different minister or department, who will repeat the same 3 steps. Be patient, keep trying. In my case, federally, both Member of Parliament and the Minister of Environment did not respond to my emails at all. The provincial Minister of the Environment passed the buck by suggesting I contact the MLA for my riding. The MLA for my riding forwarded my email to the Minister of the Environment, whose staff wrote back to me after 1.5 months. That letter is what I want to share with you. From the Ministry of Environment. Dear Russell, thank you for your August 29th correspondence to the Honourable Minister of Health. Your concerns were regarding carbon tax impacts in Saskatchewan. Therefore, Minister's Office has asked the Ministry of Environment to provide you with a response. In 2018, the federal government imposed the carbon tax across Canada, setting a price of $20 per ton of carbon dioxide emitted starting in 2019. The price has risen to $50 per ton in 2022 and is scheduled to increase each year by $15 per ton until it reaches $170 per ton in 2030. In 2021, the government of Saskatchewan challenged the constitutionality of a federal carbon tax, and the Supreme Court of Canada upheld the federal government's authority to mandate that each province and territory develop their own carbon pricing system, or be subject to federal regulations. Although the government of Saskatchewan respects the authority of the Supreme Court, it believes the federal carbon tax is ineffective and costly for Saskatchewan families, workers, and businesses. We are working to help Saskatchewan families and businesses become more resilient to climate change while continuing to grow our economy and create jobs. I invite you to review the province's strategy, Prairie Resilience, a Made in Saskatchewan Climate Change Strategy, which can be found at Saskatchewan.ca/climatechange to learn more about how Saskatchewan is addressing climate change. For greater certainty, the federal government's carbon pricing system has two parts. Part 1 is an economy-wide charge on the consumption of fossil fuels like gasoline, diesel, and propane, more commonly known as the carbon tax. This tax is imposed in backstop provinces, including Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario, that do not have a similar levy that meets the federal carbon pricing benchmark. Part 2 is an output-based pricing system for industrial emitters that are emissions intensive and trade exposed. The federal output-based pricing system, OBPS, applies in provinces without OBPS systems. In Saskatchewan, the backstop is partially applied to electricity, including Sask Power, and natural gas transmission pipelines, including Sask Energy, Transgas. Otherwise, other EITE sectors, like oil and gas and mining, for example, are covered under Saskatchewan's OBPS program. Saskatchewan's OBPS program is designed to maintain economic competitiveness and protect against carbon leakage, industry moving production and jobs to other countries with less stringent climate policies. The provincial OBPS provides tax relief to industrial emitters from the federal carbon tax that would otherwise lead to harmful carbon leakage and increased carbon emissions. In Saskatchewan, the revenue from fuel charge is currently being returned to residents through a quarterly rebate check from the federal government, while regulated industrial emitters under the provincial OBPS program will have the option to pay into the Saskatchewan Technology Fund to meet their compliance obligations and apply for funding for innovative and transformative technologies to reduce emissions intensity. Given the absence of available data, it is difficult to quantitatively assess the extent to which carbon pricing is leading to improvements in the environment. Carbon pricing undermines economic competitiveness by imposing additional costs on households and businesses, including costs that are passed on to consumers. The graph below demonstrates that Saskatchewan has had success in reducing its greenhouse gas emissions since introducing its Prairie Resilient climate strategy in 2017, recognizing that some of the decline in emissions could be due to COVID-related decreases in economic activity. Thank you for taking the time to write. That's from the Executive Director on behalf of the Honourable Minister of Health and the Honourable Minister of the Environment. All right, it's the 2023 report from Saskatchewan, and this has the actual carbon tax initiatives, the measurable effects of the carbon tax, what's being done to help the climate, if at all. Let's take a look. So it's got 5 different metrics: natural systems, physical infrastructure, economy sustainability, community preparedness, and human well-being. And they're measured good, fair, or poor, green, yellow, red, whether something has increased, maintained, or is decreasing. So if we look at each of these things, they measure things like the total area of agricultural land. Well, that has nothing to do with the environment. Plowing over grasslands, destroying trees, forests, in order to have crops, just a monoculture, not a diverse ecosystem. That's not better for the environment. Farms are not good for the environment. Not saying they're bad and awful and we need to get rid of farms. We need them for food, but you can't count them as being good for the environment. That's their natural systems. They count in number 1 and number 2. Farming. Number 3 is soil protection compliance rate of commercial forest harvesting. Well, so their rating for themselves is to maintain their current amount of commercial forest harvesting. Well, that's not good or bad, but they've given themselves a green maintained rating. Well, it shouldn't be good, it should just be fair. 1 and 2 shouldn't even count. They could just be maintained, fair. Number 2 should not say increased and have a positive green good rating. All right. Number 4, total protected areas in Saskatchewan. If this is increased, it says, but as of January 2023, approximately 10% of the province's total lands are protected areas, and their goal is 12%. It says increased, and it's got a green upwards rating of good, but we don't have any way to compare that. The goal is 12%. We're currently at 10%. What were we at? If we were at 10% the year before and 10% a decade ago, then we haven't increased. So there's no way based on this to say that we have or have not increased. Number 5, seedlings distributed from SaskPower's Shand greenhouse. Well, okay, they planted some trees. That's good. I'll give it to them. Increased there. Number 6, this is in physical infrastructure. The total number of provincial culverts on the national highway system. Fields and highways get flooded. That has nothing to do with improving our environment in any way. This is just letting people keep their highways and their fields in working condition. This is an economic advantage. Number 7, renewable energy generation capacity. Their goal is by 2030 to be up to 50% of electricity generated in this province to be from renewable energy sources. And as of 2022, this is roughly 34.7% of SaskPower's electrical generation capacity was composed of renewable energy resources, an increase of 565 megawatts from 2021. So that's good. Got to give it to them there. They have increased. That's positive. Number 8, total greenhouse gas emissions from the electricity sector. Well, if they're switching over to renewable energy, then that should be getting better. They've given themselves a maintained mark and called it green for some reason. It should just be yellow. Number 9, area of SaskPower power lines right of way widened. Well, giving power lines more land, the Crown Corporation, SaskPower, giving them more land to run power lines, that has no benefit to our environment whatsoever. That will not have an effect on climate change. So that should not be in here. That should not be a metric at all. Number 10, total energy consumption for government-owned buildings. This one's funny. Their goal is to reduce energy and intensity consumption to 0.818 gigajoules per square meter. So their goal is 0.8. And then they say in 2022, government-owned buildings, total energy consumption was 1.2 gigajoules, slightly higher than last year's intensity consumption. So they need to get from about 1.2 gigajoules down to 0.8, which would be a reduction of about 1/3 of their electricity consumption. And by their own admission, 2022 was a higher rate of energy consumption than the previous year. So that's worse. They're doing worse. They've given themselves an increased green mark. Good job. But no, that's definitely worse. Number 11, total greenhouse gas emissions from government-owned buildings. Well, if they're using more energy, greenhouse gas emissions should be up. Their goal by 2030 is to get to about 63,000 tons of CO2, and 2022, they were at 93,000 tons. So yes, just like number 10, they need about a 1/3 reduction. They've given themselves a positive, an increased mark, but that's the exact opposite of reality. Fourth metric, economic sustainability. Can't forget that money when you're thinking about trees. Number 12 is total greenhouse gas emissions produced in association with oil. And by 2025, only 2 more years, reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 6.4 megatons, a 4.5 megaton reduction from 2015 emissions. What are we at right now? 3.9. megatons, falling below the 2025 target. So that did get worse, and they've given themselves a decreased mark, but instead of calling it poor and marking it red, they've given themselves a good green mark. That looks much better. Green looks better. Number 13, emissions intensity of Saskatchewan's economy. So greenhouse gases per unit of GDP. So their target is continued decrease in the emission intensity of Saskatchewan's economy. That's good. It's a vague, unachievable goal. Current status. In 2021, greenhouse gas emission intensity was 813 tons. Carbon dioxide per million chained $2012. Not sure what that is, and they don't say what it used to be, so we have no way to compare. They've given themselves an increased but fair yellow mark, so that doesn't really make sense. I guess they had to come up with something. Number 14, realized net farm income. Well, once again, farms have nothing to do with climate change improving our environment in any way. The income from farming should not be a metric at all. Saying that the current status is that in 2021, net farm income showed an increase of 36% compared to 2020. Like, farmers got paid. What does that have to do with the fauna and flora of this country? Nothing. They've given themselves a green maintained mark. Once again, they're confused with their own system of rating things. 15, percentage of cultivated land in different types of crops. His target is no one crop type to rise above 50% of the cultivated area. Current status, in 2022, no crop comprised more than 50% of the cultivated area. So that's maintained? I guess so. Good mark. Once again, farms have nothing to do with the environment. 16, annual sustainable timber harvest utilization. So chopping down trees, forestry. Not to exceed 100% of the allowable annual cut for any timber supply area. So the government sets those allowable areas and cut. So as long as no company violates the policies already in place, then there won't be an issue. So that really has nothing to do with the environment, once again. And it says, as of 2021, 2022, all TSAs in the province were below the AAC limit. So companies logged what they were allowed to log. That's what it means. They weren't chopping down extra trees. This has everything to do with their work permit and forestry and nothing to do with the environment and climate change. Community preparedness. So 17 is floods, 18 is wildfires, and 19 is also wildfires. These are just, it's protecting people and their property. That's it. It's got nothing to do with the environment. But good for them. They've given themselves a bunch of increased marks for metrics that have nothing to do with the environment. Next part, human well-being. 20 is average municipal water consumption per capita, and their goal is to decrease municipal water consumption per capita. Their current status is municipal water use increased in 2021, with residents using an average of 335 liters per person per day compared to 326 liters per day in 2020. So that's gotten worse. From 2020 to 2021, that got worse. They've given themselves a green mark and said they've maintained. That is false. They've definitely gotten worse. It's a red mark. Number 21, Saskatchewan's healthy beaches. The goal, at least 95% of water samples taken from suitable beaches in Saskatchewan are within the healthy limits for pathogens. The current status is in 2022, E. coli was within acceptable safety limits in more than 95% of water samples taken from participating beaches. Great, okay, it was maintained, but define participating beaches. The ones that didn't meet the standards, the ones that failed, were they able to opt out of the test? Number 22, number of active surveys at suitable habitat sites for Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases. That has nothing to do with the environment. Whether people get a tick on them this spring has nothing to do with climate change. They've given themselves a green mark, said they've maintained it. So once again, they're failing their own rating system, but the green sure looks good. And that's it. the 22 measurable effects of the carbon tax. Personally, I would love to see research grants for a green replacement for the petroleum-covered insulation on all of the electric wires we use. What do you think of the carbon tax? Leave a comment below. Links with info are in the description. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to see more, and check out my other channel. My first channel's got animation, and I've got an app, Greed Monster, in the Play Store for Android phones.